Hey, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be joining in from. This is Chris Torrence over at Optum with another episode of the semi-related podcast. Today we got a special guest joining in, Lucas Schorer from Kestrel Insights, a company that I've been following for a while, and my organization is looking to kind of see where we can take it in terms of a partnership. So with that, Lucas, man, welcome today. How you doing, man?
Good. No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Yeah, doing well. I got a little 4-month-old first baby, so we are kind of
Oh,
coming out of the
congrats.
crazy period. So I'm doing
Yeah.
well. I'm here. I'm awake, and so yeah. No, I appreciate you having me today.
Congratulations. Is this your first one?
First one, little girl, and
Nice.
yeah, it's been a blast, but quite a different summer. I'm up here in Whitefish, Montana, which I'm sure we'll
Yeah,
chat about,
beautiful.
but quite a difference from past summers here to this one, but in all great ways. So
Awesome. Well, again, welcome to the Dad Club. I'm surprised you were able to make time today, considering I don't remember what month survival mode kind of started to wane, but 4 months sound like it seems like it's been a while. But as any parent will probably tell you, when you measure in like minutes and hours and even days, it seems like an eternity, as you could probably imagine.
yes.
And but when you look back as a dad myself with some older ones, it's you go back and go, man, that flew by. So enjoy every moment, man.
Thank you.
Um,
I appreciate it.
yeah, yeah. Well, and tell me about. So you born and raised in Montana?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
And the worst part is, which I weigh whether to say this sometimes to people in Montana. I'm actually from California, which is not a good thing to advertise here, but it's getting better. But no, so I'm not from Montana. My wife is a huge snow skier and loves to be outside, and same with me. So that's what eventually brought us here. But I'm from Northern California originally, and
Okay.
yeah, wandered out here in 2019.
So you got out right before the COVID boom of everybody heading out to Jackson Hole, Montana, and I think it became like the billionaire safe haven for when you
Oh
thought the
my
world was
gosh.
going in. So
Exactly. It's yeah, it was an interesting place to definitely be during COVID. So I'm one of three. I've got an older brother and a younger sister. I was here in Whitefish and in Montana during COVID. My brother was in Manhattan, and then
oh wow,
my sister's in Salt Lake City. So between me and my brother mainly was just an incredible difference of experience.
yeah,
So yeah, it's a good spot. Yeah, that billionaire haven is most people in Montana. It's hard to get people too riled up about politics, but the one thing that gets people is this billionaire haven thing of buying up these huge ranches and trying
yeah.
to trying to block hunting access. You're trying to block hunting access here, and
Good luck.
people will lose their minds. So yeah, it's been an interesting kind of state to live in and kind of learn the ins
Well,
and
I've
outs of.
only been to Montana a handful of times, usually like Billings, I think, but
Okay.
beautiful, man. I got a sibling too. My brother and his in-laws have a cabin out there, and
Oh, cool.
it's the one week of the year they get off the grid. I think they got to like travel like an hour to a bar to use a phone or see a ball game, but that's what they
Yeah.
wanted, right? So
Yeah.
he sent pics, man, and I am so jealous. And again, in this age we live in with constant social media and digital world and tech, it's just, man, sometimes there's days I think we all wish we could just go back to go out there to the final frontier and say, let's live life for what it was meant to be. But
Yeah.
alas, the alarm clock goes off on Monday morning and we log in, right? So,
Yeah.
uh,
I mean, especially places like Montana. I mean, Starlink has like
yeah,
made these little cabins remote in the woods be totally functionable workplaces. So it's pretty wild. I'm not like in a crazy remote area, but we just, because of where our house is in town, we're a little bit outside of town, but we didn't have like fiber to us, so we were on like CenturyLink dial-up, and it was terrible. So I've got Starlink at my house here, and I mean I can see my neighbors. I'm not like
awesome.
in the middle of nowhere, but I was blown away at how good it truly is. I mean, I'm on Starlink for this call, and it's yeah, you can go pretty remote and still have fully functioning job, which is pretty impressive.
That's, Starlink is, you hear the term game changer, but, and Elon, everyone has their thoughts on Elon, but it's awesome to see him rolling that out in more remote areas. And I even see with these, again, for this, a lot of friends, we talked about Florida before we joined, and
Yeah.
the Western Carolinas, I think Starlink is the one solution that everybody's craving as much as anything other than life necessities. But
Of
again,
course.
you almost look at the online world as a life necessity in a lot of ways this day and age. But yeah, man, that's great to hear that you got a great bandwidth to the signal from Starlink. I rarely
So
talk
we
to
can do
anybody
this.
that's
We can chat.
utilizing it. Super
Yeah,
cool.
it's awesome. Yeah, it's cool. It's been a lot
So
of
you
fun out
grew
here.
up in Cali. It looks like you went to Cal Poly. Is that where
Yeah,
you did a little school time? Yeah.
go Mustangs.
Yeah.
There not much of a sports scene there. It was funny because my wife and I were talking about, just cracking up about this little bundle of joy is going to go off and go to college one day. And I was like, man, I hope she goes to like an SEC school, like Alabama or something where I can like live this sports experience, because we did not have that at Cal Poly. We had a good soccer team, and
Yeah.
but I mean, it wasn't something I was looking for anyway. So yeah, I grew up in Sacramento, went down to Cal Poly, studied mechanical engineering down there, and loved it. It's crazy to look back at. You graduate high school, you're 18, 19 years old, and you got to like pick a major or like some. And I guess in some colleges, at least you have 2 years. Cal Poly, you actually declare on your application.
Oh wow.
It's because their whole goal there is like learn by doing and very hands on, and they want to get you ingrained in like what you want to study early. But it's like, I'm looking back, I'm like, how would I have even made that decision then? So it was actually funny because going into it, I was talking to my parents. I was like, I have no idea what I want to do. And they're like, oh, I don't
Fair.
blame you. And my dad, he's actually an ER doc, and he studied civil engineering undergrad.
Okay.
And he looked back at it and was like, I don't regret it. It teaches you how to think, teaches you how to problem
Yeah.
solve. So I was like, all right, that sounds good. And so I went into the engineering school. I really enjoyed it. Don't do anything hands-on related to mechanical engineering in my role here at Kestrel Insights and geofences. But I don't regret it at all. So yeah, it was great going down there. Met my wife there in we were in the same dorm building, tower, whatever you call it, and became good friends. And then the rest is history. And but yeah, it was good. One of the funniest parts in college though was my grandparents lived in San Luis Obispo, so I got to go over for Sunday dinners
Little
and do
laundry, Sunday
laundry.
dinner.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it was a lot of fun. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Well, that's awesome, man. Again, I have with my 7-year-old son. You were talking about how you had to declare a major like on the
Yeah,
application, which
yeah,
honestly I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and I got a few years on me, but
yeah,
I haphazard landed in where I'm at. It's worked out, but yeah, that's incredible. And I often think my wife and I, we're storing some, start the 529 tax shelter
yeah,
for education. We were talking the other night. I'm like, I don't even know what education will look like by the time
yeah,
yours or mine are at that point of
100%.
17, 18. Like, I got some buddies that I worked with at Uber back in the day, and they've started this, with COVID, right? There was a shakeup of education. It
Hmm.
went to the virtual environment, and they're kind of, I got a buddy that's created a company that's kind of like they're touting it as the Netflix of education. So,
Interesting.
where the new gen coming up, all they know is digital. They're like
Hmm.
literally online for better or worse. Not going to advocate for staying on iPads all day. You'll find
Yeah,
out soon with the
yeah,
4-month-old.
yeah,
It's got a little while, but it's just interesting to see what education looks like, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And I don't know. I couldn't tell you, but I do look at it as, there's a getting an engineering degree, like you said, that is a mindset. And I have
hmm
become, as toys is still a big part of my life, we've shifted to the Legos, and that's
yeah,
it's expensive as they are, man. It's the one little hobby my son he loves to build and put
yeah,
the technical pieces together. And so I'm a big fan of that. And I think, again, going back to just a mindset and a skill set around how pieces fit together, how things operate and work, whether it's mechanically or otherwise. I don't think that's ever a skill that will not work in your favor to some extent. So,
yeah.
um, well, Lucas,
I
tell me,
totally agree.
how did you go from you're at Cal Poly, you declared a major,
Yeah,
it's engineering, and all of a sudden
yeah,
you finish at some point the dream. You wake up one day and you're like this bubble that we lived in with co-ed life, and the whole community's like everyone, like it's a dream. It's amazing, and I always say
yeah,
that's, to me, my college experience is very little do I recollect and go, that was the class, the lecture, the professors, maybe a few, but man, that social experience I think was so important. And again, that's where I think a lot of people I tend to interact with that, with school, when they think about school, they go, that's what they took away, is just that independence and
hmm
social learning. But so you're sitting there at Cal Poly, you're going to have to graduate at some point. How do you land up in this space, man?
yeah. I totally agree with your sentiment around like some of the intrinsic values of going to college. You just like, I grew up in a pretty small little town in Northern California, and like, it just not a whole lot of just just kind of not bland suburban life, but just very suburban life. Like I'm not introduced to like tons of different scenarios or people or different lifestyles. Like when you all of a sudden leave, you're like, oh, you really just, you get a scale for, I mean, I just went to another town in California, but you just get a scale of like, there's a lot more going on out here. And I think that it can be overwhelming and inundating, or it can be inspiring and like a catalyst for other things. And I think that was, I totally agree with you, one of the best parts. I stayed in the space of engineering and that for a few years. You know, that was kind of all I knew, and wanted to explore that and if it was a good fit for me. So had a few different jobs. I worked in as a mechanical kind of R&D intern down in San Diego for a bit. Did work for a mechanical contractor in Portland, Oregon, more like heavy construction, things like that. Took a quick stint as a property manager in Telluride, Colorado. That was actually first.
Great ski town, though. Paid for itself, right? Yeah, perks.
Phenomenal. Yeah. So yeah, kind of bounced around there. Just unrelated to engineering at all. There was always just a curiosity around just chasing different ideas and different problems, and it festers in a I guess an entrepreneurship kind of mindset. And not that I was like, I thought about it, I was like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur and I want to start a business and do all that. It was just like, just a curiosity to sometimes go after problems and some of the flexibility you can have around if you can start to put together a paycheck in more creative ways. And so that kind of brought myself to kind of this space. And myself and my team early on were working on a couple different data products in the space. And what we saw was just kind of a wave of SaaS tools that came to the forefront really along the standardization of the ELD, and just like just how it just exploded the ability to do so many different things from a SaaS perspective in the space. And all these SaaS tools kind of rush in, and it kind of creates this vacuum behind them of data products and data opportunities to power these really cool tools. And so that was kind of our like visual of it all. And so that was kind of the path we took to Kestrel. The actual like light bulb event for Kestrel, which we'll talk about around geofences, was just someone brought an incredibly manual, time-consuming, just horrible task to the table of like, hey, this is what we're doing right now. And we were like, there's no way that it was just like that stereotypical, there's got to be a better way. That got us to start looking around. But yeah, it's when you look back, there was no like defining moment. It's all these baby steps that you start to slowly peek behind the curtain and go deeper and deeper into the cave. And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, we're in this. So yeah, that was kind of the curiosity of some different problems that we're seeing in the day-to-day world, and things kind of brought us to where we're at today.
Yeah, I commend you, Lucas, for taking that entrepreneurial spirit and following through. I can't tell you how many times in my career I think with a 4-month-old, that was probably, back that if I was going to do it, it would have had to have been before the kids. And now I look at just the hustle and the scrappy nature of it. And I don't want to use that as an excuse per se. There's a lot of reasons probably, but
sure.
Again, kudos to you for kind of taking that step. And everybody I talk to that's taken that endeavor, often the common denominator is they were working at another organization, or at that table you mentioned where it was like someone's throwing you this current workflow or process that you're like, maybe your mechanical engineering mind at some point is picking and going, this doesn't make any sense. Why? Again, even as a former operator, I'm sitting there, I tell my team today, if you're doing something and you're sitting there constantly going, there's a better way, a more efficient way, you're probably onto something. Mm-hmm. So again, it's just, how do you take that next step and that leap of faith to go, if I can't accomplish what I think is my vision here at this organization, then I'm going to go give it a shot. Right. So now we have Kestrel Insights. So give me some Kestrel Insights. What's the name, Lucas? I always ask people, how do you come up with that name?
Yeah. So there's two stories I tell here actually, and I'll give you the truthful one, and then the one that
give me both, man. Let's make two truths and a lie or something.
yeah. So the first one actually, when I was living in Telluride, Colorado, I started a small videography company that was focused on drone videos for real estate businesses.
Sweet,
real estate listings. So and now it's just commonplace. Like every real estate listing has drone shots now, but at the time, the just consumer drones were, this was probably 10 years ago now, consumer drones were definitely newer. Not as many people just own them. So it was a great kind of foot in the door as all that became so much more commonplace. And so Kestrel is, I don't think it's the Colorado bird or anything, but I think it's like a hawk or something from Colorado.
Just
so
stuck
like
with you.
The whole bird's eye thing.
Bird's eye, yeah.
Yeah, and then looking at trying to find domain names like Kestrel this, Kestrel that. Insights was available, so we grabbed it. And then my wife and I leave Telluride, and then a few years later, the concept of what Kestrel Insights is today around the geofencing stuff started to really come to fruition. And I was like, man, I think I still own that URL.
Oh, GoDaddy, I think I got it.
Yeah. And it's and it worked great because kind of what we do from like a visibility and like a tracking perspective, the bird's eye view thing still works great. So yeah, that was the catalyst for the name. The other story I just tell is I skipped the first part of I just owned the URL, and I was like, oh, the bird's eye view, data insights, things like that. So it happened to work, and maybe it was just something in the higher being that was like, oh, we'll keep this, we'll hold on to this URL for you, Lucas. But so.
No, it's good. I worked at a company called Forkites, which was visibility, right, and tracking. Absolutely. back in the earliest days of real time visibility, and people always ask, how did the Forkites name came up? And I think there was really no good answer. It was just like, well, kites in the air, kind of similar, parallel to the bird's eye, but it was like the kites up there, and it's kind of looks like a compass, their logo with like north side. It's like, that's the best we could come up with. But I don't really know the real deal. Maybe over a beer sometime with that founder, I'll try to dig deeper.
There's a guy here in Whitefish. His name's Scott Chisholm. He founded a company called Classy. It was in like the fundraising space. And I don't quote me on this, but I think the catalyst for that was something with Anchorman, because he was in San Diego and Stay Classy San Diego and Classy, and something from that was like the reason for. And when you create these names, it's when it's an idea on the back of a napkin or in your garage, and then all of a sudden, a couple of years. I mean, we've been doing this now for almost 4 years, and we've really built like an expertise around geofencing, and it's like all of a sudden 4 years flies by, and you're pretty well established in this funky little data niche, and it's funny to think of this name that you're at the time you're like, I got 1,000 other things to do. Just grab a name and let's go.
I don't know how many startups I've worked at that there's more time spent on what to name the product versus like, hey, that's the last thing I'm concerned about, right? Just tack on AI to anything this day and age, and there you go. Okay, you get people to wake up a little bit. But well, how did you get so again, we got this talking geofencing. I like got the name.
Well, I want to give like a little over, because we'll go down this rabbit hole.
That's where I was going.
Yeah. So basically, like, what is even a geofence, and like, why are you even doing this, Lucas? So in the simplest sense of the word, just a geofence is a virtual boundary anywhere on Earth. You can draw it around your house, my house, your office, my office. You can put it anywhere. It can be any size, any shape. It doesn't have to follow any physical or rigid boundaries. You can just draw it and do whatever you want. In trucking and transportation and fleet management, the focus of a geofence is really to automate tracking. And instead of having to manually write down, hey, I got here at this time, or I left at this time, or I was here for this long, or going onto an app and hitting a button, or remembering to go onto an app and hit a button if I've arrived. It basically automates that whole process, because a geofence by itself is useless. You have to pair it with that Find My Friends little blue dot on the map to break the geofence and to stay inside it. So from the most basic sense of the word, that's what a geofence is. And that's what we've built a company around.
How have you, and I'm familiar with geofences, again, had, like I said, spent some time in the early visibility of this industry, supply chain. And I couldn't agree more, Lucas. I think that's anything we can automate that just doesn't make sense and makes the user experience, whether you're in the corporate office or out on the road, right? Just one less thing I got to do. So I'm a big fan of that. I think it's geofencing's been around, and again, I don't want to predate myself, but the concept's been around for a while. But I don't know it's really hit scale up until probably in the last few years. Mm-hmm. But I think that typically, again, we can nerd out a little bit, but I think with Kestrel, right, I think there's this notion of like a geofence is this radius in a circular sense. You guys have and there's a few others maybe that have taken more of a polygon approach to make sure that there's not false positives. And I think in my early days, when you saw that circular radius, And even I think there were times where you'd see like an interstate that had a location geofence, and it would ping the truck going at
Oh
some
yeah.
point, but it was like, this is not going to, so it was, again, that false positive. So I think the polygon, being able to really like customize the shape, right? The polygon.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you guys kind of trial and error where like, let's start with just a circumference, and then did you start to realize there were some of those potential like issues around false positives, and like now it's kind of take it into more like an exact geofence around a given location?
Yeah, so that was definitely the focal point. So from the start 4 years ago, we never touched a circle. We were like this, that was like
Anti-circle, yeah.
that was what we were trying to get away from the start. Now, there are plenty of use cases where a circular geofence is exactly what you need. Like, for example, let's say you want to do like 100-mile radius, 50-mile radius to like provide triggers around, hey, we're getting close and we're really honing in. Phenomenal application. You don't need Kestrel to do that. But then when you really get to that final truth of arrival of like, hey, we are on site, that's where we focus. So plenty of times where circles are great, but what we wanted to focus on, circles were not, because if you're using that circle for that true final arrival and departure notifications, that's where you start to get a lot of those false positives. And like you said, geofencing has been around for so long. What we looked at it, and you talk about, you worked at Uber, or there was this like mentality around startups of like disruption, like disrupt an industry, disrupt something. We are not that. Like, we are not we're not this. It's not our business model. It's not our team. It's not our mindset around geofencing of like, we're going to blow this out of the water. This is so different. This is new. It's really not. Like, I look at it as, that's like, hey, I've been driving a gas car for a long time. All of a sudden, electrical vehicles are coming up and someone's trying to sell you on an electrical vehicle. That's disruptive. That's new. That's a whole new concept to wrap my brain around. That's not what we're doing. You drive a car, you go to work, you have your route. I'm trying to get you better tires. I'm trying to get you a better radio. I'm trying to like improve the experience of what you already have going. And I can bring something to the table, like a part that just needs to get replaced or updated. That's really what we do.
Gotcha.
And so what the status quo around geofencing has been circles, put a bunch of addresses onto a map, drops all those pins, and you just pick a radius. So great for automation, but starts to break down when it comes to accuracy and precision of truly when did something arrive or depart a facility. So the second most common way to do this in the industry is, like you said, the polygons, but it's hand drawing polygons. So tons of other people do this. All kinds of telematics platforms, track and trace, visibility. You can draw a polygon on pretty much any platform that uses geofences, but it's very, very time consuming. It typically falls on the lap of someone who it's not their job description. They've got other things to do. Polygon drawer is never something I've seen on LinkedIn as an open position. So it's a very manual process. So what we basically did was we built a data bolt-on, a product where you basically bolt this onto your existing telematics, your track and trace, whatever you're doing today, again, that car example, and we can automate the creation of those polygons. So instead of putting in an address and getting a circle, you put in an address and get a polygon. Instead of hand drawing a polygon, you don't have to do anything. So that's kind of how we've approached the way people think about geofencing and what we want to provide in its place.
Lucas, when you think about all the different use cases, and again, we're talking about mobility a lot, why did you choose like trucking? What about that stood out to you as kind of like the first place you want to insert this technology?
So it's a great question because, from like a marketing side, when we were looking at, when we were trying to tag on to like keywords and things like that, we were seeing a lot of traffic for geofencing, but we found out very quickly the large use from a marketing perspective and other industries. So number one, a lot of use cases, like I mentioned, can get away with circular geofences. Like if you put a circle around like an NBA stadium or something like that, arena, and you're like, hey, I want to see mobile phones that came in and out of this general area and then serve them an ad for the Golden State Warriors or something. It's like, you're going to get close enough and that's fine. The precision really mattered for this industry because it was these triggers and these notifications and these timestamps we could see were starting to get used for a lot more different things to automate arrival messaging, dwell tracking. It was starting to have this butterfly effect that we saw as like, hey, back it way up to the beginning of that geofence, the accuracy and the precision really matters here, where for some other industries and some applications, you don't need it. And it was just what we were in at the time and where we saw the problem.
Sure.
So that was kind of the reason for that.
And do you guys today, Lucas, are you serving, when you talk about your ICP, your customer profile that you feel like is the right fit for what you do, is it mostly asset providers for hire, private fleets, dedicated? Do you have brokers that maybe use this as well? I'm just trying to give the audience a little bit more flavor of like, who would be the ideal use case in terms of what their assets or non-assets look like today?
Yeah, it's that the answer to that question has evolved, obviously over the last 2 years. Originally, yes, it was basically, asset-based carriers. Actually, originally it was software platforms that are selling a tool with geofences. So our first kind of customer segment was we were selling directly to the track and trace platforms or software solutions that in their platform, they had geofencing in some way. So it could have either been geofences that supported backend reports and analytics and things like that, or customer facing tools that allowed their end users to leverage geofences for different things. So that was our initial. And then what we've done really over the course of 2024 the most is we've expanded out of like a direct to SaaS model. We still do that a lot and still have phenomenal partners there and sign more every day. But we've also started to build our own integrations on a lot of the open APIs in the industry.
Yeah.
So whether it's Samsara, Geotab, Motive, Project 44, things like that, where there's open APIs that allow us to tie into the geofencing functionality in their platform. We build the integration so it's turnkey. If someone's like, cool, I'm using geofencing here, I want to automate it, I flip on Kestrel. There's not a single API endpoint they need to worry about, a token, a line of code. We've already done all that. And now we can sell direct to the carriers, the brokers and things like that. So yeah, carriers, brokers, asset, non-asset.
Do the shippers themselves also see value in just saying, hey, I have a vested interest to know as well, right? It's a symbiotic kind of relationship when you talk about shippers, carriers, 3PLs, broker. It's all an ecosystem. Are they receptive as well?
So I don't know because I haven't tried. And I'll tell you like an interesting, it's a great question and we get asked it a lot. We've been so busy on like the integrations we've built and like the asset brokerage side of the things, but you're 100% right. That shipper side is a really interesting conversation because it's kind of a chicken before the egg thing too. Like what's nice now is, we have millions of these geofences in our database, which is the value of that customers really get to tap into. Before you send me a single address, and we'll talk about how we process locations, but before you send me a single address, there's already millions of geofences in here. So you inherently tap into kind of there's a network effect here of what we're building before you even sign up, which is really valuable. But let's say I've got every Home Depot, Walmart, name any big shipper, things like that. I've got them all. People are using them every day in our system. It'd be interesting to go to Home Depot or Walmart or whoever and be like, hey, I've got all these geofences. You should standardize the use of these geofences around anyone coming to your location, because the value for like a Home Depot is people are using these geofences to either send them notifications of arrival or send them dwell reports or things like that. And what we see is there's thousands of different carriers coming to the same shipper location. There could be 1,000 different geofences, whether someone drew them.
That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
Different circles. So if we can have one single source of truth for that location, there's a big impact on kind of operational efficiency for Home Depot to know that there's one geofence that these guys are all using. So we haven't gone that route yet as a company, but it's really interesting. We've had some preliminary conversations. Anyone listening today, they're like, hey, I love it. I'm a shipper. I'll be your beta.
Always take that call, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll always take that call. So yeah, it's a great question.
Well, cool. Well, dig a little deeper. You kind of started on that, talking about some of the calculations and whatnot. Can you give us a little bit more just for the technical people that listen in? I'm not one of them, so they're probably over my head, but that's okay. I conceptually understand it. Talk about, get a little deeper on kind of the math behind that from a geospatial perspective. If there's a triangulation aspect to that, there's a lot of like people are like, oh, it's you make it simple, you simplified it by going, you just can draw a polygon, but it's like, yeah, but how does that all connect and how does that work? So give us a little more context and kind of the math behind that. Yeah.
So we basically the to start the process, we need to know just something very simple: where you're going. Like, what do you want a geofence for? And so we can ingest one of three things basically, and this can happen either via our APIs or CSV bulk uploads, whatever you prefer. So either an address, like, hey, I got a load going from A to B. Point B is 123 Main Street in Whitefish, Montana, blah, blah, blah. Perfect. I can take that address, plot it in our database, and find the geofence associated with that address. And then you get back that geofence. The second one, which we rolled out earlier this year, was we had a lot of customers coming to us and say, hey, I don't have addresses, but I have GPS points. Like, I know where assets are. I'm monitoring these heat maps, Lucas, and I can see that I get congested of parking in this area. Like, here's a GPS point, Lucas. I don't know what's there. Can you do something with that? So now we can take that GPS point, do the same thing, plot it in our database, find which geofence is associated with it, and get it back. The third, which was newer this year, is our POI, or point of interest functionality. So this was customers who didn't have an address, didn't have a lat long, but they had a vertical of some type that they wanted to get visibility into. So one of the initial customers, they came to us and said, Lucas, I need all metal recycling yards in these 10 states. And the reason was it was an electrical distributor company, and they didn't want their electricians going to these locations to turn in copper for cash. And so their process was, they would zoom in on Google, they would type in metal recycling yard, hit enter, write down the address for all the pins that dropped, zoom out, zoom in again, and they would do this. And it was just unbelievable.
It's tedious. Yeah.
In a couple of days, we had 10,000 polygon geofences for them for every metal recycling yard across the Southeast. So that's how we ingest location requests. One of the biggest questions we get is, Lucas, what if you don't have the location we asked for, which is very common. I mean, like, to say I have every geofence you will ever need was never going to be a realistic statement, but we thought we could build, what if we came at it from a different perspective of, hey, except we're not going to be able to do that, but build a system that can add locations kind of on the fly. And so what our system will do is it'll check your location request in our system. If it has a geofence, great, it'll send it out. If we don't, we will add it. And luckily, that's not Lucas in the basement drawing polygons. We leverage different databases around like real estate boundaries, building footprints, roads, things like that to add these locations. So from like a programmatic perspective, that's kind of how the life cycle works.
Awesome, man. I think that that process of the Google zooming in and out and
my God.
I've been around long enough, man, that as embarrassing it is to say, there were times we had to kind of resort to those more
we've all
archaic,
done it.
Yeah. How do you mentioned the APIs? I mean, again, I think I'm a tech forward guy. I think that thankfully APIs are starting to proliferate a little more. You mentioned that you also may have to resort to other communication methods. So you mentioned CSV, flat files, I guess EDI too, right? So you're having to kind of, as you get into trucking, right, there's some people come into this space like, oh, well, why wouldn't you be using, everyone's on APIs. And then you realize quickly it's like, oh, wow, it's actually a smaller percentage of, those that actually adhere to that newer technology. How do you kind of reconcile that with people that are like, we like it, but is it like, do you go, oh, don't worry about it. Your TMS has that capability and therefore that's going to be our data source and we'll just work with them directly on your behalf. How do you navigate the different types of communication methods that are very prevalent in trucking and this day and age still, contrary to popular belief, are still somewhat behind the curveball?
Yeah.
So how do you I'm sure you get that sometimes. Is that prohibitive, or how do you respond to people that may have that concern?
Yeah. So number one, we're experts in a very funky, small, focused niche. Yeah. So like we can help a ton when it comes to the geofencing piece, because basically all we need to do is typically the example you're talking about is like someone who's like either a carrier or a broker who doesn't have like the in-house engineering or tech development, personnel to do these types of connections. So ideally they're coming to us and they're already on one of our integrations that we've pre-built. And that was the goal there, was to eliminate the need for them to even have to bring up the concept or word API, because it's done and they don't even need to worry about it. They'll just see the geofences in the dashboard of their use. Sometimes though, there's another system that like they need to get addresses into their telematics or track and trace from, and that's kind of where maybe the barrier is. And we can help with a lot of that, whether it's looking at that system and finding ways to automate like exports of addresses, and then we get those into the telematics or things like that. Because again, we have such a focused niche of like, we've seen it so many times. We have a lot of experience in being able to connect some of those systems. It's not our go-to. Like, I'm not looking to sell our services of like integrating different systems, but if you see value in what we're doing from geofencing and you want to get there and we can help you get there and work together for, long prosperous time, then we'll absolutely, assist there, because we don't expect anyone to have spent as much time and effort around the concept of geofencing as us, or really to care as much as we do. And so we're there to be that partner and that expert in that space. Plenty of other people and systems and great companies that can do much more complicated things, from connections around APIs and integrating systems. But when it comes to taking advantage of the geofencing piece, we can certainly be an asset.
Lucas, what do you say to folks, again, coming from a visibility background and I tell people, I talk to these up and coming founders that are trying to continue to evolve this technology. Some are kind of, I think with the early entrants, whether it's the macro points, the Forekites, the Project 44s, and you mentioned a plethora of others, they are kind of, they kind of came in after the ELD mandate, and that's now a mandate for all interstate travels to have this capability through, on board devices, telematics data, et cetera, a lot that would change the game. Yeah. But I'm also seeing a trend now where there's, what is the next wave? There's companies now that have hardware devices, whether that are down to the pallet or skid level. I was talking to one founder a while ago, and he was trying to create a technology that you could actually embed into the packaging material itself. So when you're talking to people that have a vested interest of knowing where their products are, again, a lot of the shippers, but carriers, like, you could argue both ways, have a need to know that. How does that type of tracking technology kind of, does that mesh well within the geofencing technology, so I can see it outside of geofence, and then when it crosses into that boundary, that geofence boundary, how does that all work? Am I still tracking it at that, whether it's the asset or the skid pallet level? Mm-hmm. Does that kind of coincide with and just a validation within a geofence? Or how, again, I'm just trying to, as someone who's been around, like, that's something I would want to know is, do I need both? Is one better than the other? Are they complementary? How do you kind of answer that question?
Yeah, I would say definitely complementary, because like it'd be interesting to see, like I say, you're looking at like an LTL shipment. You've got a ELD tracker on the whole truck itself or the whole trailer, and then you could now look at the pallets inside, like different loads inside, and you have individual trackers there. And now you can start to almost nest tracking devices for different applications. And we see that a lot from the geofencing perspective of nesting geofences for different applications. So, for example, we have a global seaport geofencing data set, which is the outer geofence is the entire kind of port authority, every terminal and everything kind of a part of that port. And then inside that main geofence, we have nested geofences for like the terminals themselves, and then reefer stations, like things like that. So it's kind of the same perspective of like, how granular do you need to go for whatever you're trying to accomplish? Like I am definitely guilty of, cool, new technology. Yeah, let's get it. I'm like, wait, I don't need to do this or that or the other. So I think for plenty of applications, it will be right, and it will be extremely helpful. What we see, and what I would hope there's a good focus on as well, and I'm not as in tune with like product development on the hardware side, but we see a lot of issues around GPS drift. And so, you've got your people can use either mobile devices to track things. You can use the hardware ELD on the car, but it could be something could be sitting perfectly still, and that dot will do this. And as it's kind of triangulating and finding its spot, I think stuff actually works better when it's moving, because it just because of the movement or something, it can actually have a better track. So what will happen is sometimes our geofence will be too accurate, and let's say they're right on the parcel, they're right on the building, and it covers everything perfectly, but a truck parks right on the edge of it, and the thing will like bounce out, and and then it'll come back in. And it's a little bit of, there's some platforms out there that have built in really cool kind of tolerances for this stuff. So if it's like, you can kind of have a sliding scale on,
Yeah.
hey, if the truck was only there for 5 minutes, don't mark it as delivered quite yet, like
Right.
or 10 minutes, because it's like it's bouncing back out and it's coming back in. So I think there's some ways around it, but eventually it comes down to the accuracy of the tracking device and whether it's using satellite or whatever it's using mobile. So I'd love to see growth in the accuracy of that versus maybe smaller and smaller trackers, because I hate for like smaller and smaller trackers, but they still drift.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we see a lot of.
You know what, I spent some time in the shipper world as well, and I think that was the geofence was often the validation or the gut check of, and often it could be disputes, right? So a carrier's like, oh, I was there on time. Often, and again, a carrier this type of technology applies to both. But do you see instances where your customers are going back on, what's really been great about this is it's a very objective stance on. You mentioned there's some drift cases, and you guys have a tolerance or sliding scale, which is, I agree with that. But do you find there's times where it kind of is able to there's disputes amongst was the carrier there on time? And I think it's a lot of, back in the day, it used to be, it's just your honor system or word of mouth, or you're relying on a gate guard that got you checked in and you were there, but you were the 12th truck in line at the check-in. And so it's like, you're late. Do you find that that's a pretty you're providing, I guess, a lot of just empirical, objective data points to go, hey, this is objective now. There's no more hearsay of were you here on time, were you late, how long were you sitting there? You mentioned dwell time, Lucas. Is that all just added benefits and value adds for Kestrel when you go into these type of engagements?
Definitely, and I am a fatal optimist, and so I see it more as I never want to be this perception around, oh, we're going to help you catch bad actors. It's more especially in a B2B world, we all have lives outside, families outside. We all go home at the end of the day. It's helpful to hey, let's be efficient. It's better if we all operate smoothly.
Yeah.
It's better for everyone to have the right data to fix the problem. Because if you don't have the data to point to what the problem truly is, you can't eliminate it. And so, let's say we had it early on, we had a use case of some big distribution center, and this carrier was getting 8-hour, 9-hour, 10-hour detention reports. It was just something insane. And they're working with the customer saying, hey, we're having these issues. How can we fix this? They're looking at their logs. They're like, I don't see that at all. We see 45-hour turnaround times. What's going on? They were using this huge geofence that covered the DC and a Love's travel stop that was right next door. And so they just had the wrong data to fix the issue. There actually wasn't an issue. And so it's just time and money and resources spent chasing a shadow. And it's so we absolutely see it as not only just an unbiased way of looking at what happened in a situation, but also giving you the right data to make the right business decisions to just work together with partners. I mean, in this industry, you're always working with people outside a house. And so third parties, whether it's shippers or carriers or shippers and all these different things. And making sure you're both on the same page is so valuable. And so, we see that a ton. It's such a small, simple timestamp. Really, a geofence spits out 3 things: arrival, departure, and time spent within.
Yeah.
3 things, nothing else. It's what people do with that can start to have this butterfly effect. And so if you're going to make business decisions downstream or start to push it for notification or do all these things, it can start to grow in that domino effect. So absolutely. It's hey, just have the right data from the start. And then from there, you can do all these wonderful things. I'm a pure believer in people want to do great things and will. And
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm a bit of an eternal optimist. I'm a realistic optimist or an optimistic realist. And I know there's kind of I'm not sure which one it is, but I think we're on the same mindset there. You mentioned data, Lucas. I think that's, for those that haven't been in this industry, I think there's always a little bit of this notion that everyone's going to have, work with some academics. And I think this notion of, of course the data is going to be correct and the data integrity and it's accessible, it's accurate.
Yep.
Not always the case, as I'm sure you've learned. So what can when you're engaging with prospects or even existing customers from a data standpoint, what are some best practices they can adhere to make sure they're maximizing the value that Kestrel provides? And knowing that that's easier said than done, And knowing there may be variations within data sets. How do you, again, there's a reconciliation process even on that, but what are, again, best practices? What are your minimum like data integrity thresholds or requirements for this to even be a real value add versus going down this path, knowing the data is bad to begin with, and the garbage in, garbage out mindset inevitably comes to fruition at some point. So again, how do you address that with folks you engage with?
So the first thing we look at is, okay, if we're going to be pulling addresses or GPS points from your system, where did those come from? Because if we don't address that, let's say I just grab all your addresses, I process them, give you back geofences, and you're like, wait, these are in the wrong spot. It's like, well, no, that is exactly where that address is. And it's like, oh, well, that address is like, kind of close. It's like, okay, I don't have that level of visibility. So
that's right.
It's helpful to bring out, like, it's helpful to expose that early on. Cause we'll have some customers or not customers. We'll have like prospects where they're like, I see what this does and what this can do. This is going to open a whole can of worms and I don't want to do it. And it's like, that's very much a stick your head in the sand mentality of like, I just don't want to address it. And like, I get it, but I pity that approach. So number one, that's what we look at is, okay, if we're going to pull addresses or GPS points from your telematics or whatever it is, where did those come from? And so we'll have that conversation and kind of do a root cause analysis there with them before we start processing any geofences. So that's, I think, the most important thing. And if those are coming from good spots or, they've already been geocoded and standardized, geocoding takes an address and turns it into a GPS point. Like if that's all been done and happy dory, great, then we can start going from there. But that's kind of the first thing we want to understand. The second that we always tell customers is once we flip this on, you're introducing a whole new data set to your daily operations that has not been there before. So whether you were on mile radius circles or whatever it was, we're now going to really see what's going on here. So we're going to be getting maybe some new notifications, some false flags that we'll clean up with you guys. But like, we're going to introduce a new data set here that I tell everyone, this is not going to be a silver bullet and all your problems are solved tomorrow. We're going to fix a lot of them. We're going to expose some new ones, and then we're going to address those. And so just like making sure that expectations are clear around that is first and foremost what we want to always be upfront about. And it's not like we're creating all these new problems and now that's this issue, but it's really just shedding light on areas you weren't before. And in the long run, it's going to just make things so much more smooth and like the data is so much better. And so that's like kind of how we approach it from like an onboarding kind of side of things. So yeah, kind of.
No, I'm hopeful. There's one. I think no matter how cool the technologies that I see, there's a bunch, and again, since the COVID era, we've seen a huge, just almost a saturation point of the amount of venture capital and all these cool technologies in this industry that, at least in my 25 plus years, did not exist, or at least the level of interest. But I'm with you, man. I think that one of the core fundamental issues is there is no standard, like data standardization across the industry. There's no governance of that data. So every customer or prospect may see things slightly different, but I'm sitting there going, guys, it's the physical world. So like, you drop a pen on some level, that's the truth. Like, and again, but if your data's bad, or I can't always fix that. So I'm hopeful, again, this is my optimism again, that at some point in the near future, hopefully, that our industry at large starts to say, hey guys, if we're all going to be, create an ecosystem of valued partnerships, can we all at least agree on certain, like the idea of some of these data points are just, we've got to agree that it is what it is, and get to that point where we can say for a location, for example, this is again a physical location that exists on the physical world. Yeah. I know that your data you got it in your ERP or your TMS, it's WMS. You got this location that's been entered by every third-party vendor that has access, and they've typed it differently or fat fingered, anything. Can we just cleanse this out? It's like the spring cleaning, though. It's like, you need to do it, but nobody wants to do it. So I don't think that's just indicative of just like a Kestrel. So it applies to every vendor I've ever worked at myself or been associated with. And I don't have the answer to that, but I think that'll be, again, these are fundamentals that you just assume that in any industry, you guys at least agree on this, right? And it's like, not always. Yeah. So I'm with you on that.
I've got a good friend and he's in the industry. Michael Caney, he's over at Highway.
Yeah,
And
no, Katie, just
yeah,
saw him.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. He made a comment once. He was like, I don't know the exact wording, but it was like being like pathological about the truth, or just so passionate about the truth. And this, some people might argue this, but like, I would hope the truth is truly unbiased. Like, the truth is not like your opinion or something like I'm against what you did or you built, or I'm malicious against anything else. It's just like, hey, this is what is happening or what happened. Now it comes back to, now we know and we can solve it. Like, it's like, if you're chasing things based on data, like those one guys who thought they had 10-hour detention reports, that's not the truth. And
That's
so
right.
if we can provide just unbiased insight to the truth, and it just opens up so many more possibilities. So like, our biggest focal points is automation and accuracy. The automation comes around like just not drawing geofences and removing that ridiculous process. But then the accuracy is because of that truth component around like, the accuracy matters because it'll tell you what's really going on and give you the tools to now do whatever you want to do.
And with Caney, Jordan, and the Highway team, I mean, again, we're talking about fraud, and that's obviously a massive topic. So I applaud Caney. I applaud you. I think you noted earlier that there are still people in this industry that would rather bury their head in the sand and not face the reality. And I don't know if it's because they look at the lift to get everything like on track is just insurmountable, or there may be fear of they've been, it's kind of hiding things in a dark corner that they don't want exposure to find out what's really been happening. And I've seen that happen, but I'll be honest, Lucas, I've worked at organizations that take that mindset of we'd rather not know. Typically the lifespan of those executives that take that stance is limited. And I think organizations, at least I like to feel that they are absolutely, they're truth seekers as well, which ultimately lifts the industry, right? So way to touch on that. Lucas, I wanted to ask you, man, we're kind of, we've been going for a while. Where's the future, whether it's Kestrel Insights, whether it's the future of geofencing, other applications? Where do you see from like a roadmap perspective or other cool technologies that may be complementary? Where does this all go? Where's Kestrel Insights in 3 years, 5 years from now? What are you tackling other solutions? Are you still hardening the product you have today? Is it that innovation hardening balancing act that every tech company experiences? But what are some other use cases that the audience may say, well, we understand geofences. What else can we do?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. And of course, coming to the end of the year, always looking at like budgets and roadmap for next year. We're having these conversations right now. So just from like a company and what we want to do, we want to grow our integrations and make sure anyone who wants to use this can use it without having to worry about an API or a token or anything. Like, so we definitely want to grow those. So if someone comes to us and is like, hey, I want to use this, but I'm not on one of your pre-built integrations right now. Say, okay, where are you? Can we get it built? Because we really built like an integration framework here that, yes, each different platform might have a slightly different header and a slightly different format, but what we do in terms of ingesting address, processing, and provide geofence, we can now flip these integrations on much faster, and that we built this kind of template. So that's what we want to do from a company side. From like technology and like use case side, this company Kestrel started, when I did this 4 years ago, whatever now, was like, okay, address in for a US based warehouse, geofence out. And very quickly it turned into, airports all over the world, seaports in Singapore, border crossings in South Africa, copper mines in China, like all these crazy use cases started coming up. Some of them were really cool ones recently. We're working with a tree trimming company where we update them daily for the fire risks ratings in these different areas, so they can know and notify their teams, hey, you got a truck in a high risk zone, put on your chainsaw spark arresters or whatever it is. So I think people we're realizing they're bringing these use cases to us of just, now that I'm not having to sit there and draw these geofences or manage it or anything like that, their mind immediately is like more willing to look at all these really cool applications of how it can support their fleet and their trucking operations. So I think that's going to grow more and more and more, is just like the use case around it, because hopefully we are removing that manual effort and hesitation to expand a painfully slow process that was before. Because you're like, when you know it's going to suck, you're like, yeah, I'm getting to it. It's on my list. I'll get there. But now it's like, oh, I just feed ideas to Lucas and endpoints to, or GPS points to Lucas, and I don't have to do anything else. Like, you're more willing to engage in like growth. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see where those things go. We obviously are very intimately connected to like tracking technology and things like that. So I mentioned the GPS drift things. I think that could be, you know, really impactful for us. And then obviously AI. How does AI impact anything and everything that we're all doing?
We made it over almost an hour without saying AI, but
I know
we did it.
It's not, you know, I don't sit there every day, all day thinking about ways that I need to be leveraging AI and ChatGPT. It drives me nuts because I can see posts and blogs that I know are written by Chat. And it's like, dude, this is obvious. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts like satellite imagery recognition and building footprints and like reviewing that kind of stuff for us. So I don't have an answer there. I don't even think I have enough to make a prediction.
I mean, you're an entrepreneur, so think big, right? Yeah. You know, we talk about weather, obviously a very relevant topic as of late, namely in the Southeast. I definitely see use cases with even in the federal government area. And I don't know if this technology I have no idea what they're using today. Maybe they have something, but yeah, you look at how weather patterns and how the drivers on the interstate system should, you know, whether it's the fires out on the West Coast that we see happen year after year. Again, the weather patterns we've seen obviously this week. I'm up in the Chicago area, Midwest. There's probably some use cases of creating a geofence to go, hey, if you cross into this threshold, there's a high probability that you're going to run into some severe weather at some point. So maybe, that's like, again, there's so many cool ideas that I think you could expand on this notion of just a basic geofence. What are the other applications? I applaud you for like at least thinking about that.
I was born in Evanston.
Nice. Okay. Okay.
So
well, not too far.
But familiar with the area.
Small world. Well, tell us, like, and I don't have to give pricing away, Lucas, but like for people that are like, hey, I gotta, you know, it's been a deflationary market, freight recession, tight on budget. For folks that are interested, but say, like, is this going to cost me an arm and a leg? Again, you expose what you want on this conversation, but
for sure,
how can they look to factor this in as budget seasons, kind of like we're planning into 2025? What kind of cost are we looking at? And I think you've done an amazing job explaining the benefits. Is this something that is pretty feasible and digestible from a cost standpoint?
I certainly think so, and we have to be. We had someone describe it as like aim for budget dust. Like, Lucas, especially if we're a bolt on to like a telematics platform or something like that. Like, someone's already spending X for this platform. We can't be like 50% of that. We can't even be 10% of that. We need to be a very small add-on that they don't think about. They just like it makes total sense. So number one, so our pricing, especially for our integrations, for our SaaS customers, it's a little different and a little more customizable because they're just doing a lot more different things, or they want to leverage endpoints this way or do X, Y, Z.
That's right.
A little different over there. But for our integrations and like our connected fleets and things like that, we base it on connected vehicles. So that way, if you've got 5 trucks, you can totally take advantage of this. And if you've got 5,000 trucks, we can support the resources to take care of you. We don't, because we basically want to just give you unlimited geofences. So if you've got 5 trucks, you're probably going to need a certain amount. If you've got 5,000, you're going to have a much bigger need. So basically open up the database and get what you need. That can be a couple $100 a month up to $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a month, kind of depending on where you fall in that space. We've got enterprise above that, but that's kind of a very general bell curve. I encourage people to reach out if you've got questions on how do we hone that in. But I would say the goal is to make it very, very digestible.
Well, good segue. And I love the term budget dust. I may have to start. I may take that from you. That's a good one. But yeah, Lucas, as we kind of reach the top of the hour, I want to make sure I give you some time back in your day. I'm sure you got a lot going on, especially with the 4-month-old. But yeah,
she's a daycare, so we're good.
Oh, daycare. Okay, good. You get a little. That's how you get work done, right?
Exactly.
Where can people reach you, man? What's the best way they can get a hold of Lucas or the team?
Yeah. So LinkedIn, super easy to find us. Very responsive on there. You can email me, Lucas. I say that because when I say my email, it's kind of hard to write down, but it's lucas@KestrelInsights.com. But LinkedIn is phenomenal. And our website kind of highlights a bunch of use cases, things that people might find interesting. So yeah, we're not too hard to get a hold of.
Very cool. Well, I know Optum, my own little selfish plug here, I guess, is
Yeah.
I love what you guys are doing. I know we've been connected at Optum as an optimization vendor. We're always seeking more data points to make our outputs more robust. So love what you're doing. I know we have a conversation going, so hope to keep that traction moving as well. Lucas, are you guys, I know you're in Montana, at least today.
Yeah.
Are you going to be out and about at any of the fall conferences, or maybe not this year, but looking into next year?
Yeah. So we have,
I know you have a 4-month-old, so you got to get the pass for travel at this point. Maybe, good luck.
Yeah. So we kind of switched our conference strategy this year, and we went to a lot more user conferences. So the integration partners that we've built these integrations with, we've gone to those a lot of, because it's a lot of the end users that are going to be using it. We don't get swallowed up as much in like these big tech conferences where, it's kind of a different audience. And so we've done a lot of that this year. I think we've got another one. I can't remember in fall and who exactly it was, but none of like the Technovations or things like that we're going to be at this year. But yeah, we're always out and about. So if people are at places they want to see if we can connect, just let us know. And
awesome.
Yeah, we'd love to meet up with people.
Well, Lucas, is there anything we didn't talk about today that you feel like, hey, there's one more thing I want to give, I want to make sure I address before we let you go? Anything, or I think we covered the bases?
I think we pretty much covered the bases. I always encourage people, if you have a question of anything, an idea, anything related to geofences, and I didn't say we do it, come ask, because we probably have or have been asked it before. I can point you in the right direction of where we've seen other people be successful, either with us or without us. So if you got a question about geofences or use case, bring it by us, and we can certainly help.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Lucas is the man. So if it involves geofences at a minimum, definitely ping Lucas and the team. I'm sure they can at least get you answers to what you need. So with that, again, thanks for everybody that was able to join in today. Again, thoughts are with all those down in the Florida area, as today looks like could be a pretty. We'll see where the day unfolds into tomorrow, but wishing everybody, thoughts and prayers down in Florida. And again, thanks for everybody for tuning in today. And we'll be back with another episode of Semi Related here in the near future. So, Lucas, thanks again for the time, man.